Hey guys, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? Mainly people. Before I start this amazing book, please hit that like button. Please share. And subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. And if you get anything from my work, a light bulb moment, a connect the dot, a mic drop, a new book to read, someone else to look up, please consider helping me out and supporting my work. It's very appreciated. The links will be in the drop box below if you're capable of doing so. So I first read the introduction. It was long, worth it. This is the Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, which have influenced modern Masonic symbolism, Part 1. Then confronted with a problem involving the use of the reasoning faculties, individuals of strong intellect keep their poise and seek to reach a solution by obtaining facts bearing upon the question. Those of immature mentality, on the other hand, will similarly confronted are overwhelmed. While the former may be qualified to solve the riddle of their own destiny, the latter must be led like a flock of sheep and taught in simple language. They depend almost entirely upon the ministrations of the shepherd. The Apostle Paul said that their little ones must be fed with milk, but that meat is the food of strong men. Thoughtlessness is also synonymous with childishness, while thoughtfulness is a symbolic of maturity. There are, however, but few mature minds in the world, and thus it was that the philosophic religious doctrines of the pagans were divided to meet the needs of these two fundamental groups of human intellect. One philosophic and the other incapable of appreciating the deeper mysteries of life. To the discerning, very few were revealed the Stoic or spiritual teachings, while the unqualified many received only the literal or exotic interpretations. In order to make simple the great truths of nature and the abstract principles of natural law, the vital forces of the universe were personified, becoming the gods and goddesses of the ancient mythologies. While the ignorant multitudes brought their offerings to the altars of Proprius and Pan, deities representing the progenitive energies, the wise recognized in these marble statues only symbolic consecrations of great abstract truths. In all cities of the ancient world were temples for public worship and offering. In every community also were philosophers and mystics deeply versed in nature's lore. These individuals were usually banded together, forming seclusive philosophic and religious schools. The most important of these groups were known as the mysteries. Many of the great minds of antiquity were initiated into these secret fraternities by strange and mysterious rites, some of which were extremely cruel. Alexander Wilder defines the mysteries as sacred dramas performed at state periods. The most celebrated were those of Isis, Sabazius, Sebel, and Eleusis. After being admitted, the initiates were instructed in the secret wisdom which had been preserved for ages. Plato, an initiate of one of these sacred orders, was severely criticized because of his writings. He revealed to the public many of the secret philosophic principles of the mysteries. Every pagan nation had and has not only its state religion, but another into which the philosophic elect alone have gained entrance. Many of these ancient cults cults vanished from the earth without revealing their secrets, but a very few have survived the test of ages, and their mysterious symbols are still preserved. Much of the ritualism of Freemasonry is based on the trials of which candidates were subjected by the ancient Hierophants before the keys of wisdom were entrusted to them. Few realize the extent to which the ancient secret schools influence contemporary intellects, and through those minds, posterity. Robert McCoy, 33 Degreed, in his General History of Freemasonry, pays a magnificent tribute to the part played by the ancient mysteries in the rearing of the edifice of human culture. He says, in part, it appears that all the perfection of civilization and all the advancement made in philosophy, science, and art among the ancients are due to those institutions which, under the veil of mystery, sought to illustrate the sublimest truths of religion, morality, and virtue, and impress them on the hearts of their disciples. Their chief object was to teach the doctrine of one God, the resurrection of man to eternal life, the dignity of the human soul, and to lead people to see the shadow of the deity and the beauty, magnificence, and splendor of the universe. With the decline of virtue, which has preceded the destruction of every nation of history, the mysteries became perverted. Sorcery took the place of the divine magic. Indescribable practices such as bacchanalia, I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, by the way, FYI, were introduced, and perversion ruled supreme, for no institution can be any better than the members of which it is composed. In despair, the few who were true sought to preserve the secret doctrines from oblivion. In such cases, they succeeded, but more often they were lost, and only empty shell of the mysteries remained. Thomas Taylor has written, man is naturally a religious animal. From the earliest dawning of his consciousness, man has worshipped and revered things as symbolic of the invisible, omnipresent, indescribable thing, concerning which he could discover practically nothing. The pagan mysteries opposed the Christians during the early centuries of their church, declaring that the new faith, Christianity, did not demand virtue and integrity as requisites for salvation. Celsius expressed himself on the subject in the following caustic terms, quote, that I do not, however, accuse the Christians more bitterly than truth compels, may be conjectured from hence that the criers who call men to other mysteries proclaim as follows: let him approach whose hands are pure and whose words are wise. And again, other proclaim, let him approach who is pure from all wickedness, whose soul is not conscious of any evil, and who lends a just and upright life. And these things are proclaimed by those who promise a purification from error. Let us now hear who those are that are called to the Christian mysteries. Whoever is a sinner, whoever is unwise, whoever is a fool, and whoever, in short, is miserable, him the kingdom of God will receive. Do you not therefore call a sinner an unjust man, a thief, a housebreaker, a wizard, one who is sacrilegious, and a robber of sepulchres? What other persons would the crier nominate who should call robbers together? It was not the true faith of the early Christian mystics that Celsius attacked, but the false forms that were creeping in even during his day. The ideals of early Christianity were based upon the high moral standards of the pagan mysteries, and the first Christians who met under the city of Rome used as their places of worship the subterranean temples of Mithras, from whose cult has been borrowed much of the I'm trying to see if I can project this word properly, and I don't think I can, but I'll give it a shot, like I always do on every one of my readings that I can't project words. Secretism. I took a crack, of the modern church. The ancient philosophers believed that no man could live independently who did not have a fundamental knowledge of nature and her laws. Before man can obey, he must understand. And the mysteries were devoid to instructing man concerning the operation of divine law in the terrestrial sphere. Few of the early cults actually worshipped anthropomorphic deities, although their symbolism might lead one to believe they did. They were moralistic rather than religionistic, philosophic rather than theologic. They taught man to use his faculties more interestingly, to be patient in the face of adversity, to be courageous when confronted by danger, to be true in the midst of temptation, and most of all, to view a worthy life as the most acceptable sacrifice to God, and his body as an altar sacred to the deity. Sun worship played an important part in nearly all the early pagan mysteries. This indicates the probability of their Atlantean origin, for the people of Atlantis were sun worshippers. The solar deity was usually personified as a beautiful youth with long golden hair to symbolize the rays of the sun. This golden sun god was slain by wicked ruffians who personified the evil principle of the universe. By means of certain rituals and ceremonies, symbolic of purification and regeneration, this wonderful God of good was brought back to life and became the savior of his people. The secret possesses whereby he was resurrected symbolize those cultures by means of which man is able to overcome his lower nature, master his appetites, and give expression to the higher side of himself. The mysteries were organized for the purpose of assisting the struggling men and human to creature to reawaken the spiritual powers which surrounded by the flaming ring of lust and degeneracy lay asleep within his soul. In other words, man was offered a way by which he could regain his lost estate. In the ancient world, nearly all the secret societies were philosophic and religious. During the medieval centuries, they were chiefly religious and political, although a few philosophic schools remained. In modern times, secret societies in the Occidental countries are largely political or fraternal, although in a few of them, as in Masonry, the ancient religious and philosophic principles still survive. Space prohibits a detailed discussion of the secret books and the secret schools. There were literally scores of these ancient cults, which branch in all parts of the Eastern and Western worlds. Some, such as those of Pythagoras and the Hermeticists, show a decided Oriental influence, while the Rosicrucians, according to their own proclamations, gained much of their wisdom from the Arabian mystics. Although the mystery schools are usually associated with civilization, there is evidence that the most uncivilized people of prehistoric times had knowledge of them. Natives of distant islands, many of the lowest forms of savagery, had mystic rituals and secret practices, which, although primitive, are of decided Masonic tinge. Very interesting, to say the least. This is one of my favorite topics, guys. The Druidic mysteries of Britain and Gaul. Well, look at me. I'm Irish and Scandinavian. The original and primitive inhabitants of Britain at some remote period revived and reformed their national institutes. Their priests or instructors had hereto been simply named Gwyd, Wood, but it was considered to have become necessary to divide this office between the national and superior priests and others whose influence would be more limited. From henceforth, the former became Druid, or superior instructor, and latter Gowid or Ovid, Ovate, subordinate instructor, and both went by the general name bards, or teachers of wisdom. As the system matured and augmented, the barrack order consisted of three classes: the Druids, the Birdrant, or privileged bards, and Ovates. The origin of the word Druid is under dispute. Max Mueller believes that, like the Irish word Drury, it means the men of the oak trees. He further draws attention to the fact that the forest gods and tree deities of the Greeks were called dryads. Some believe the word to be Teutonic origin, others ascribe it to the Welsh. A few trace it to the Gaelic Drui, which means a wise man or sorcerer. In Sanskrit, the word Drew means timber. At the time of the Roman conquest, the Druids were thoroughly ensconced in Britain and Gaul. Their power over the people were unquestioned, and there were instances in which armies about to attack each other sheathed their swords when ordered to do so by the white-robed Druids. No undertaking of great importance was stated and started without the assistance of these patriarchs, who stood as mediators between the gods and men. The Druidic order is deservedly credited with having a deep understanding of natural and her laws. The Encyclopedia Britannica states that geography, physical science, natural theology, and astrology were their favorite studies. These Druids had a fundamental knowledge of medicine, especially the use of herbs and simples. Crude surgical instruments also have been found in England and Ireland. An odd treatise on early British medicine states that every practitioner was expected to have a garden or backyard for growing of certain herbs necessary to his profession. Apicius Levi, the celebrated transcendentalists. Guys, I say this word all the time and I can't project it out. That's a problem for me today. Makes the following significant statement. Let me adjust my teeth. No clue if I made that worse, but we'll go with it. The Druids were priests and physicians curing by magnetism and charging amulets with their fluidic influence. Their universal remedies were mistletoe and serpent's eggs, because these substances attract the astral light in a special manner. The solemnity with which mistletoe was cut down drew upon the plant the popular confidence and rendered it powerfully magnetic. The process of magnetism will someday reveal to us the absorbing properties of mistletoe. We shall then understand the secret of those spongy growths which drew the unusual virtues of plants and become surcharged with tinctures and saviors. Mushrooms, truffles, gall on trees, and different kinds of mistletoe will be employed with the understanding by a medicinal science, which will be new because it is old. But one must not move quicker than science, which recedes, that it may advance the further. Not only was the mistletoe sacred as symbolic of the universal medicine or panacea, but also because of the fact that it grew upon the oak tree. Through the symbol of the oak, the Druids worshiped the supreme deity. Therefore, anything growing upon the tree was sacred to him. At certain seasons, according to the positions of the sun, moon, and stars, the arch-druid climbed the oak tree and cut the mistletoe with a golden sickle consecrated for that service. The parasitic growth was caught in the white cloths provided for the purpose, lest it touch the earth and be polluted by terrestrial vibrations. Usually a sacrifice of a white bull was made under the tree. The Druids were initiates of a secret school that existed in their midst. The school, which closely resembled the Baclic and Lucian, I can't project that, guys, mysteries of Greek and of the Egyptian rites of Isis and Osiris. It justly designated the Druidic mysteries. There has been much speculation concerning the secret wisdom that the Druids claim to possess. Their secret teachings were never written, but were communicated orally to specific prepared candidates. Robert Brown, 32 degree, is of the opinion that the British priests secured their information from the Tyrian and Phoenician navigators who thousands of years before the Christian era established colonies in Britain and Gaul while searching for tin. Thomas Maurice, in his Indian Antiquities, discourses at length on Phoenician, Carthaginian, and Greek expeditions to the British Isles for the purpose of procuring tin. Others are of the opinion that mysteries as celebrated by the Druids were of an Oriental origin, possibly Buddhist. The proximity of the British Isles to the lost Atlantis may account for the sun worship, which plays an important part in the rituals of Druidism. According to Artemidorus, Ceres and Phosphorone were worshipped on an island close to Britain with rites and ceremonies similar to those of Samothrace. There is no doubt that the Druidic pantheon includes a large number of Greek and Roman deities. This greatly amazed Caesar during his conquest of Britain and Gaul and caused him to affirm that these tribes adored Mercury, Apollo, Mars, and Jupiter in a manner similar to that of the Latin countries. It is almost certain that the Druidic mysteries were not indigenous to Britain or Gaul, but migrated from one of the more ancient civilizations. The school of the Druids was divided into three distinct parts, and the secret teachings embodied therein are particularly the same as the mysteries concealed under the allegories of the Blue Lodge Masonry. The lowest of the three divisions was that of Ovid. This was an honorary degree requiring no special purification or preparation. The Ovids dressed in green, the Druid color of learning, and were expected to know something about medicine, astronomy, poetry, if possible, and sometimes music. An Ovate was an individual admitted to the Druidic order because of his general excellence and superior knowledge concerning the problems of life. The second division was that of the Bard. Its members were robed in sky blue to represent harmony and truth, and to them was assigned the labor of memorizing, at least in part, the 20,000 verses of Druidic sacred poetry. They were often pictured with a primitive British or Irish harp, an instrument strung with human hair, and having as many strings as there were ribs on the side of the one side of a human body. These bards were often chosen as teachers of candidates seeking entrance into the Druidic mysteries. Neophytes wore striped robes of blue, green, and white, these being the three sacred colors of the Druidic order. The third division was the Druid. Its particular labor was to minister to the religious needs of people. To reach the dignity, the candidate must first become a bard. The Druids always dressed in white, symbolic of their purity, and the color used by them symbolized the sun. It's a lot, but that's really accurate. In order to reach the exalted position of Archdruid or spiritual head of an organization, it was necessary for a priest to pass through the 6 successive degrees of the Druidic order. The members of the different degrees were differentiated by the colors of their sashes, for all of them wore robes of white. Some writers are of the opinion that the title of Archdruid was hereditary, descending from father to son, but it is more probable that the honor was conferred by ballot election. Its recipient was chosen for his virtues and integrity for the most learned members of the higher Druidic degrees. According to James Gardner, there were usually 2 Archdruids in Britain, one residing on the Isle of Anglesey, and the other on the Isle of Man. Presumably, there were others in Gaul. These dignitaries generally carried golden scepters and were crowned with wreaths of oak leaves, symbolic of their authority. The younger members of the Druidic order were clean-shaven and modestly dressed, but the more aged had long gray beards and more magnificent golden ornaments. The educational system of the Druids in Britain was superior to that of their colleagues on the continent, and consequently, many of the Gaelic youths were sent to the Druid colleges in Britain for their philosophical instruction and training. Officius Livy states that the Druids lived in a strict abstinence, studied the natural sciences, preserved the deepest secrecy, and admitted new members only after long probationary periods. Many of the priests of the order lived in buildings not unlike the monasteries of the modern world. They were associated in groups like ascetics of the Far East. Although celibacy was not demanded of them, few married. Many of the Druids retired from the world and lived as recluses in caves, in rough stone houses, or in little shacks built in the depths of a forest. Here they prayed and meditated, emerging only to perform their religious duties. James Freeman Clarke, in his 10 Great Religions, described the beliefs of the Druids as follows. The Druids believed in the three worlds and in transmitigation from one to another, in a world above this, in which happiness predominated, a world below of misery and this present state. This transmitigation was to punish and reward and also to purify the soul. In the present world, said they, good and evil are so exactly balanced that man has the utmost freedom and is able to choose or reject either. The Welsh triads tell us that there are three objects of metempsychosis: to collect into the soul the properties of all being, to acquire a knowledge of all things, and to get power to conquer evil. There are also, they say, that three kinds of knowledge: knowledge of the nature of each thing, of its course and its influence. There are three things which continually grow less: darkness, falsehood, and death. There are three which constantly increase: light, life, and truth. Like nearly all schools of mysteries, the teachings of the Druids were divided into two distinct sections. The simpler, a moral code, was taught to all the people, while the deeper esoteric doctrine was given only to initiated priests. To be admitted to the order, a candidate was required to be of a good family and high moral character. No important secrets were entrusted to him until he had been tempted in many ways and his strength of character severely tried. The Druids taught the people of Britain and Gaul concerning the immortality of the soul. They believed in transmitigation and apparently in reincarnation. They borrowed in one life, promising to pay back in the next. They believed in a purgatorial type of hell where they could be purged of their sins after passing on to the happiness of the unity with the gods. The Druids taught that all men would be saved, but that some must return to earth many times to learn the lessons of a human life and to overcome the inherent evil of their own natures. Before a candidate was entrusted with the secret doctrines of the Druids, he was bound with the robe of secrecy. These doctrines were imparted only in the depths of forests and in the darkness of caves. In these places, far from the haunts of men, the neophyte was instructed concerning the creation of the universe, the personalities of the gods, the laws of nature, the secrets of occult medicine, the mysteries of the celestial bodies, and the rudiments of magic and sorcery. The Druids had a great number of feasts, days. The new and full moon and the sixth day of the moon were sacred periods. It is believed that initiations took place only at the two solaces and the two equinoxes. At dawn on the 25th day of December, the birth of the sun god was celebrated. Interesting. That's tomorrow because you flip it for the polls. The secret teachings of the Druids are said by some to be tinctured with Pythagorean philosophy. The Druids had a Madonna, or a virgin mother with a child in her arms, who was sacred to their mysteries, and their sun god was resurrected at the time of the year corresponding to that at which modern Christians celebrate Easter. Both the cross and the serpent were sacred to the Druids, who made the former by cutting off all the branches of the oak tree and fastening one of them to the main trunk in the form of the letter T. This oak cross became symbolic of their superior deity. They also worshiped the sun, moon, and stars. The moon received their special veneration. Caesar stated that Mercury was one of the chief deities of the Gauls. The Druids are believed to have worshipped Mercury under the similitude of a stone cube. They also had great veneration for the nature spirits, fairies, gnomes, and underdines, little creatures of the forest and rivers, to whom many offerings were made. Describing the temples of the Druids, Charles Hackthorne, in the Secret Society of All Ages and Countries, says, their temples wherein the sacred fire was preserved were generally situated on eminences and in dense groves of oak, and assumed various forms, circular, because the circle was the emblem of the universe, oval in allusion to the mundane egg, from which issued, according to the traditions of many nations, the universe, or according to others, our first parents, serpentine, because the serpent was the symbol of who? The Druid or Cyrus cuneiform, because of a cross is an emblem of regeneration, or winged, to represent the motion of the divine spirit. Their chief deities were reducible to two, a male and a female, the great father and mother, Hu and Cedarwin, distinguished by the same characteristics as belong to Osiris and Isis, Bacchus and Ceres, or any other supreme god and goddess representing the two principles of all being. Godfrey Higgins states that Hu, the mighty, regarded as the first settler of Britain, came from the place from which the Welsh triads called the summer country, the present site of Constantinople. Albert Pike says that the lost word of masonry is concealed in the name of the Druid god Hu. Hu. The Minger information extent concerning the secret initiations of the Druids indicates a decided similarity between their mystery school and the school of Greece and Egypt. Hu, the sun god, was murdered, and after a number of strange ordeals and mystic rituals was restored to life. There were 3 degrees of Druidic mysteries, but few successfully passed them all. The candidates were buried in a coffin as symbolic of the death of the sun god. The supreme test, however, was being sent out to sea in an open boat. While undergoing this ordeal, many lost their lives. Talzin, an ancient scholar who passed through the mysteries, describes the initiation of the open boat to Faber's pagan idolatry. The few who passed this 3rd degree were said to have been born again and were instructed in the secret and hidden truths which the pagan priests and preserved from antiquity. From these, the initiates were chosen many of the dignitaries of the British religions and political world. For further details, see Faber's Pagan Idolatry, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, and Godfrey Higgins' Celtic Druids. The rites of Mithras, whatever you want to say. When the Persian mysteries immigrated into the southern Europe, they were quickly assimilated by the Latin mind. The cult grew rapidly, especially among the Roman soldiery, and during the Roman wars of conquest, the teachings were carried by the legionnaires to nearly all parts of Europe. So powerful did the cult of Mithras become that at least one Roman emperor was initiated into the order, which met in caverns under the city of Rome. Concerning the spread of the mystery school through different parts of Europe, C.W. King in his Gnostics and Their Remains say, quote, Mithric bas reliefs cut on the faces of rocks or on stone tablets still abound in the countries formerly the western provinces of the Roman Empire. Many exist in Germany, still more in France, and in this island, Britain. They have often been discovered on the line of Pict's wall and noted one on Bath, end quote. Alexander Wilder, in his philosophy and ethics of the Zoroaster, states that Mithras is the Zen title for the sun, and he is supposed to dwell within the shining orb. Mithras has a male and female aspect, though not himself androgynous. As Mithras, he is the lord of the sun, powerful and radiant, and most magnificent of the Yitzhas, Izads, or genii of the sun. As Mithra, this deity represents the feminine principle. The mundane universe is recognized as her symbol. She represents nature as receptive and terrestrial, and as fruitful only when bathed in the glory of the solar orb. The Mithratic cult is simplification of the more elaborate teachings of Zarathustra, Zoroaster, the Persian fire magician. According to the Persians, there coexisted in eternity two principles. The first of these, Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd. We can find that in a Wasp Bay. Was the spirit of good. From Ormazd came forth a number of hierarchies of good and beautiful spirits, angels and archangels. The second of these eternally existing principles was called Ahriman. He was also pure and beautiful spirit, but he later rebelled against Ormazd, being jealous of his power. This did not occur, however, until the Ormazd had created light, for previously the Ahriman had not been conscious of the existence of I'm just going to say Ormazd, because of his jealousy and rebellion. Ahriman became the spirit of evil. From himself, he individualized a host of destructive creatures to injure Ormazd. When Ormazd created the earth, Ahriman entered into a grosser elements. Whenever Ormazd did a good deed, Ahriman placed the principle of evil within it. At last, when Ormazd created the human race, Ahriman became incarnate in the lower nature of man, so that in each personality, the spirit of good and the spirit of evil struggled for control. For 3,000 years, Ormazd ruled the celestial worlds with light and goodness. Then he created man. For another 3,000 years, he ruled man with wisdom and integrity. Then the power of Ahriman began, and the struggle for the soul of man continues through the next period of 3,000 years. During the fourth period of 3,000 years, the power of Ahriman will be destroyed. Good will return to the world again. Evil and death will be vanquished. And at last, the spirit of evil will bow humbly before the throne of Ormazd. While Ormazd and Ahriman are struggling for control of the human soul for the supremacy in nature, Mithras, God of intelligence, stands as mediator between the two. Many authors have noted the similarity between Mercury and Mithras, as the chemical mercury acts as a solvent, according to the alchemists. So Mithras seeks to harmonize the two celestial opposites. There are many points of resemblance between Christianity and the cult of Mithras. One of the reasons for this is probably that the Persian mystics invaded Italy during the 1st century after Christ, and the early history of both cults were closely interwoven. The Encyclopedia Britannica makes the following statement concerning the Mithric and Christian mysteries. The fraternal and democratic spirit of the first communities and their humble origin, the identification of the object of admiration with light and the sun, the legends of the shepherds with their gifts and admiration, the flood and the ark, the representation in art and the fiery chariot, the drawing of water from the rock, the use of bell and candle, holy water and the communion, the sanctification of Sunday and of the 25th of December, the instance on moral conduct and the emphasis placed on abstinence and self-control, the doctrine of heaven and hell, of primitive revelation, of the meditation of the Logos emanating from the divine, the atoning sacrifice, the constant warfare between good and evil, and the final triumph of the former, the immortality of the soul, the last judgment, the resurrection of the flesh, and the fiery destruction of the universe, These are some of the resemblances which, whether real or only apparent, enable Mithraism to prolong the resistance to Christianity. Damn. The fraternal and democratic spirit of the first communities and their humble origin, the identification of the object of admiration with light and the sun, the legends of the shepherds with their gifts and admiration, the flood, the ark, the representation in art, and the fiery chariot, the drawing of water from rock, the use of bell and candle, holy water, and the communion, the sanctification of Sunday and of the 25th of December, the instance of moral conduct and the emphasis placed on abstinence and self-control, the doctrine of heaven and hell, of primitive revelation, of the meditation of the Logos emanating from the divine, the atoning sacrifice, the constant warfare between good and evil, and the final triumph of the former, the immortality of the soul in the last judgment, the resurrection of flesh, and the fiery destruction of the universe. These are some of the resemblances which, whether real or only apparent, enable Mithraism to prolong in its resistance to Christianity. The rites of Mithras were performed in caves. Porphyry is the cave of nymphs. States that Zoroaster was the first to consecrate a cave to the worship of God, because a cavern was a symbolic of the earth or the lower world of darkness. John P. Lundy, in his Monumental Christianity, describes the cave of Mithras as follows: but this cave was adorned with the signs of the zodiac, Cancer and Capricorn. The summer and winter solstices were chiefly conspicuous as the gates of souls descending into this life, or passing out of it in their ascent to the gods, Cancer being the gate of descent and the Capricorn of ascent. These are the two avenues of the immortals passing up and down from earth to heaven and from heaven to earth. The so-called chair of St. Peter in Rome was believed to have been used in one of the pagan mysteries, possibly that of Mithras, in whose subterranean grottos the vortices of the Christian mysteries met in the early days of their faith. In Acropolis, Godfrey Higgins writes that in 1662, while cleaning this sacred chair of Bar Jonas, the 12 laborers of Hercules were discovered upon it, and there later the French discovered upon the same chair the Mohammedan confession of faith written in Arabic. Initiation into the rites of Mithras, like initiation into many other degrees, preparation for these degrees consists of self-purification, the building up of intellectual powers, and the control of the animal nature. In the first degree, the candidate was given a crown upon the point of a sword and instructed in the mysteries of Mithras, hidden power. Probably he was taught that the golden crown represented his own spiritual nature, which must be objectified and unfolded before he could truly glorify Mithras. For Mithras was his own soul, standing at the mediator between Orismond, his spirit, and Ahriman, his animal nature. In the second degree, he was given the armor of intelligence and purity, sent into the darkness of subterranean pits to fight the beasts of lust, passion, and degeneracy. In the third degree, he was given a cape upon which were drawn woven the signs of the zodiac and other astronomical symbols. After his initiations were over, he was hailed as one who had risen from the dead, was instructed in the secret teachings of the Persian mystics, and became a full-fledged member of the order. Candidates who successfully passed their Mithric initiations were called lions and were marked upon their foreheads with the Egyptian cross. Mithras himself is often pictured with the head of a lion and two pairs of wings. Throughout the entire ritual was repeated references to the birth of Mithras as a sun god, his sacrifice for men, his death, that men might have eternal life, and lastly, his resurrection and saving of all humanity by his intercession before the throne of Orismond. While the cult of Mithras did not reach the philosophic heights attained by Zarathustra, its effect upon the civilization of the Western world was far-reaching, for at one time, nearly all Europe was converted to its doctrines. Rome, in her intercourse with other nations, inoculated them with her religious principles. And many later institutions have exhibited Mithric culture. The reference to the lion and the grip of the lion's paw in the Master Mason's degree have a strong Mithric tinge and may easily have originated from this cult. A ladder of 7 rungs appears in the Mithric initiation. Faber is of the opinion that this ladder was originally a pyramid of 7 steps. It is possible that the Masonic ladder with 7 rungs had its origin in the Mithric symbol. Women were never permitted to enter the Mithric order, but children of the male sex was initiates long before they reached maturity. The refusal to permit women to join the Messianic order may be based on the esoteric reason given in the secret instructions of the Mithrics. This cult is another excellent example of those secret societies whose legends are largely symbolic representations of the sun and his journey through the house of the heavens. Mithras rising from a stone is merely the sun rising over the horizon, or as the ancients supposed, out of the horizon at the vernal equinox. John O'Neill disputes the theory that Mithras was intended as a solar deity and the night of the gods. He writes, the Avestan Mithra, the Yatza of light, has 10,000 eyes high with full knowledge, strong, sleepless, and ever awake. The supreme god, Ahura Mazda, also has 1 eye, or else it is said that with his eyes, the sun, moon, and stars, he sees everything. The theory that Mithra was originally a title of the supreme heavens of God, putting the sun out of court, is the only one that answers all requirements. It will be evident that here we have origins and abundance for the Freemason's eye and its nunquam dormo. The reader must nor confuse the Persian Mithra with the Vedic Mithra. According to Alexander Wilder, the Mithric rites supersede the mysteries of Bacchus and became the foundation of the Gnostic system, which for many centuries prevailed in Asia, Egypt, and even the remote West. Wow. I'm also going to read The Ancient Mysteries of Secret Societies, Part 2. The entire history of Christian and pagan Gnosticism is shrouded in the deepest mystery and obscurity. For while the Gnostics were undoubtedly prolific writers, little of their literature has survived. They brought down upon themselves the animosity of early Christian church, and when this institution reached its position of world power, it destroyed all available records of the Gnostic cultus. The name Gnostic means wisdom or knowledge and is derived from the Greek gnosis. The members of the order claimed to be familiar with the secret doctrines of early Christianity. They interpreted the Christian mysteries according to the pagan symbolism. Their secret information and philosophic tenets they concealed from the profane and taught to a small group only of especially initiated persons. Simon Magus, the magician of New Testament fame, is often supposed to have been the founder of Gnosticism. If this be true, the sect was formed during the century after Christ and is probably the first of many branches which have sprung from the main trunk of Christianity. Everything with which the enthusiasts of the early Christian church might not agree, they declare to be inspired by the devil. That Simon Magus had mysterious and supernatural powers conceded even by his enemies, but they maintain that these powers were lent to him by the infernal spirits and furies, which they assert were his ever-present companions. Undoubtedly, the most interesting legend concerning Simon is that which tells of his theosophic contests with the Apostle Peter, while the two were promulgated their differing doctrines in Rome. According to the story the church fathers have preserved, Simon was to prove his spiritual superiority by ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. He was actually picked up and carried many feet into the air by an invisible powers. When St. Peter saw this, he cried out in a loud voice, ordering the demons, the spirit of the air, to release their hold upon the magician. The evil spirits, when so ordered by the great saint, were forced to obey. Simon fell a great distance and was killed. which decisively proved the superiority of the Christian powers. The story is undoubtedly manufactured out of the whole cloth, as it is only one out of many accounts concerning his death, few of which agree. As more and more evidence is being amassed to the effect that St. Peter was never in Rome, it is possible vestige of authenticity is rapidly being dissipated. That Simon was a philosopher, that is no doubt, for wherever his exact words are preserved, his synthetic and transcending thoughts are beautifully expressed. The principles of Gnosticism are well described in the following verbatim statement by him, supposed to have been preserved by Hippocrates. To you, therefore, I say what I say and write what I write, and the writing is this. Of the universal aeons, periods, planes, or cycles of creative and created life is substance and space, celestial creatures. There are two shoots, without beginning or end, springing from one root, which is the power invisible, inapprehensible silence, Bathos. Of those shoots, one is manifested from above, which is the great power, the universal mind, ordering all things, male, and the other is manifested from below, the great thought, female, producing all things. Hence, pairing with each other, they unite and manifest the middle distance, incomprehensible air without beginning or end. In this, the Father who sustains all things and nourishes those things which have a beginning and an end. By this, we are to understand the manifestation is the result of a positive and negative principle, one acting upon the other, and it takes place in the middle plane or point of equilibrium called the pleroma. This pleroma is a peculiar substance produced out of the blending of the spiritual and material aeons. Out of the pleroma was an individualized the demiurgus, the immortal mortal, to whom we are responsible for our physical existence and the suffering we must go through in connection with it. In the Gnostic system, three pairs of opposites called synergies emanated from the Eternal One. These with himself make the total of 7. The 6 three pairs, aeons, living divine principles, were described by Simon in the Philosophic Pneuma in the following manner. The first 2 were mind and thought. Then came voice and its opposite, name, and lastly, reason and reflection. From the primordial 6 united with the eternal flame came forth the aeons, the angels, who form the lower worlds through the direction of the demiurgus. See the works of H.P. Blavatsky. How can this first Gnosticism of Simon Magnus and Meander, his disciple, was amplified and frequently distorted by later adherents to the occult, must now be considered. The school of Gnosticism was divided into 2 major parts, commonly called the Syrian cult and the Alexandrian cult. These schools agreed in essentials, but the later division was more inclined to be pantheistic, while the former was dualistic. While the Syrian cult was largely Simonian, the Alexandrian school was the outgrowth of the philosophical deductions of a clever Egyptian Christian, Balsildes by name, who claimed to have received his instructions from the Apostle Matthew. Like Simon Magnus, he was an emanationist with Neoplatonic inclinations. In fact, the entire Gnostic mystery is based upon the hypothesis of emanations as being the logical connection between the irreconcilable opposites, absolute spirit and absolute substance, which the Gnostics believed to have been coexistent in eternity. Some assert that I can't with these fucking names. Ballides was the true founder of Gnosticism, but there is much evidence to the effect that Simon Magnus laid down its foundational principles in the preceding century. The Alexandrian Balsaldes incalculated Egyptian Hermeticism, Oriental occultism, Chaldean astrology, and Persian philosophy in his followers. and in his doctrine sought to unite the schools of early Christianity with the ancient pagan mysteries. To him, it's attributed the formulation of the peculiar concept of the deity, which carries the name Abraxas. In discussing the original meaning of this word, Godfrey Higgins, in his Celtic Druids, has demonstrated that the numerical powers of the letters forming the word Abraxas, when added together, results in the sum of 365. The same author also notes that the name Mithras, when treated in a similar manner, has the same numerical value. Balsildes taught that the powers of the universe was divided into 365 aeons, or spiritual cycles, and that the sum of the Kabbalistic application Abraxas as being symbolized numerically of his divine powers, attributes, and emanations. Abraxas is usually symbolized as a composite creature with the body of a human being of the head of a rooster, and that each of his legs ending in a serpent. C.W. King, in his Gnostics and Their Remains, gives the following concise description of the Gnostic philosophy of Deities, quoting from the writings of his early Christian bishop and martyr, Saint Irenaeus. He asserted that the God, the uncreated eternal Father, had first brought forth nous and mind, and this logos word, this again phronesis, intelligence, from phronesis sprung Sophia, wisdom, and dynamis, strength. In describing Abraxas, C.W. King says, Belderman considers the composite image inscribed with the actual name Abraxas to be Gnostic Patheos, representing the supreme being. With the 5 emanations marked out by appropriate symbols from the human body, the usual form assigned to the deity, spring the 2 supporters, nous and logos, expressed in the serpents, symbols of the inner senses and the quickening understanding, on which account the Greeks had made the serpent the attribute of Pallas. His head, that of a cock, represents phronesis, the bird being the emblem of the foresight and vigilance. His 2 arms behold the symbols of Sophia and dynamis, the shield of wisdom and the whip of power. The Gnostics were divided in their opinions concerning the demiurgus, or creator of the lower worlds. He established a terrestrial universe with the aid of 6 suns, or emanations, possibly the planetary angels, which he formed out of, yet within himself. As stated before, the demiurgus was individualized as a lower creation out of the substance called pleroma. One group of the Gnostics was of the opinion that demiurgus was the cause of all mystery and misery, and was an evil creature who, by building the lower world, had separated the souls of men from truth by encasing them in mortal vehicles. The other sect viewed the demiurgus as being divinely inspired and merely fulfilling the dictates of an invisible Lord. Some Gnostics were of the opinion that the Jewish god Jehovah was the demiurgus. This concept, under a slightly different name, apparently influenced medieval Rosicrucianism, which viewed Jehovah as the Lord of the material universe rather than of the supreme deity. Mythology abounds with the stories of gods who partook of both celestial and terrestrial natures. Odin of Scandinavia is a good example of a deity subject to mortality, bowing before the laws of nature, and yet being, in certain senses at least, a supreme deity. The Gnostic viewpoint concerning the Christ is well worthy of consideration. This order claimed to be only sect to have actual pictures of the divine Syrian, while these were in all probability idealistic conceptions of the Savior based upon existing sculpturings and paintings of the pagan sun gods. They were all Christianity had. To the Gnostics, the Christ was the personification of nous, the divine mind, and emanated from the higher spiritual aeons. He descended into the body of Jesus as the baptism of left it again before the crucifixion. The Gnostics declared that the Christ was not crucified, as the divine nous could not suffer death, but the Simon, the Assyrian, offered his life instead, and the nous, by means of its power, caused Simon to resemble Jesus. Irenaeus makes the following statement concerning the cosmic sacrifice of the Christ. When the uncreated, unnamed Father saw the corruption of mankind, he sent his firstborn Nous into the world in the form of Christ for the redemption of all who believed in him. Out of the power of those that have fabricated the world, the Demiurgus and his 6 sons, the planetary genii, he appeared amongst men as the real man, Jesus, and wrought miracles. The Gnostics divided humanity into 3 parts. Those who, as savages, worshipped only the visible nature, those who, like the Jews, worshipped the Demiurgus, and lastly, themselves or others of similar cult, including the certain sects of Christians, who worship Nous Christ and the true spiritual light of the higher aeons. After the death of Balcells, Valentinus became the leading inspiration of the Gnostic movement. He still further complicated the system of Gnostic philosophy by adding indefinitely to the details. He increased the number of emanations from the Great One, the Abyss, to 15 pairs, and also laid much emphasis on the Virgin Sophia, or wisdom, in the book of the Savior, parts of which are commonly known as the Pistis Sophia. I've read that on my channel. May be found much material concerning the strange doctrine of eons and their strange inhabitants. James Freeman Clarke, in speaking of the doctrine of the Gnostics, says, "These doctrines, strange as they seem to us, had a wide influence in the Christian church. Many of the theories of the ancient Gnostics, especially those concerning scientific subjects, have been substantiated by modern research. Several sects branched off in the main stem of Gnosticism, such as the Valentinians, the Orpheites, serpent worshippers, and the Adamites. After the 3rd century, their power waned and the Gnostics practically vanished from the philosophic world. An effort was being made during the Middle Ages to resurrect the principles of Gnosticism, but owing to the destruction of their records, the material necessary was not available. Even today, there are evidences of Gnostic philosophy in the modern world, but they bear other names and their true origin is not suspect. Many of the Gnostic concepts have actually been incorporated into the dogmas of Christian church, and our new interpretations of Christianity are along the lines of Gnostic emanations." Really interesting there. The mysteries of Asar Hippie. Again, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Happy. The identity of the Greco-Egyptian Serpis, known to the Greeks as Serpes, is the Egyptians as Asar Happy, is shrouded by the impenetrable veil of mystery. While this deity was a familiar figure among the symbols of the secret Egyptian initiatory rites, his arcane nature was revealed only to those who had fulfilled the requirements of the Serpec cultus, Serapic cultus. Therefore, in all probability, excepting the initial priestess, the Egyptians themselves were ignorant of his true character. So far as known, there exists no authentic account of the rites of Serpis, but an analysis of the deity and his accompanying symbols reveals their salient points in an oracle delivered to the king of Cyprus. Cyppus described himself thus: "I, a god, I am such as I showed to thee. The starry heavens are my head, my trunk the sea. Earth forms my feet, my ears the air supplies. The sun's far darting brilliant rays mine eyes." Several unsatisfactory attempts have been made to eptomatize the word Serapis. Godfrey Higgins notes the Soros was the name given by the Egyptians to a stone coffin, and Apis was Osiris incarnated in the sacred bull. These 2 words combined the result in Soros Apis, or Sor Apis, the tomb of the bull. But it is improbable that the Egyptians would worship a coffin in the form of a man. Soros. Several ancient authors, included Macrobius, have affirmed that Serapis was a name for the sun because the image is so often had a halo of light about his head. It is ordained upon the sovereign sun. Julian speaks of the deity in these words: one Jove, one Pluto, one sun is Serapis. In Hebrew, Serapis is Sarah, meaning the blaze out or blaze up. For this reason, the Jews designated one of their hierarchies of spiritual beings seraphim. The most common theory, however, regarding the origin of the name Serapis is that which traces the derivation from the compound Osiris Apis. At one time, the Egyptians believed that the dead were absorbed into the nature of Osiris, the god of the dead. While marks similarly exist between Osiris Apis and Serapis, the theory advanced by Egyptologists that Serapis is merely a name given to the dead, Apis, or sacred bull of Egypt, is untenable in view of the transcendent wisdom possessed by the Egyptian priestcraft, who in all probability used the god to symbolize the soul of the world, anima mundi. The material body of nature was called Apis, the soul, which escaped from the body at death, but was enmeshed with the form during physical life, was designated Serapis. C.W. King believes Serapis is a deity of Brahmic extraction, his name being the Grecanized form of Sarada or Serapi, two titles ascribed to Yama, the Hindu god of death. This appears reasonable, especially since there is a legend to the effect that Serapis is the form of a bull, which driven by Bacchus from India to Egypt. The priority of the Hindu mysteries would further substantiate such a theory. Among other meanings suggested for the word Serapis are the sacred bull, the sun in Taurus, the soul of Osiris, the sacred serpent, and the retiring of the bull. The last appellation has reference to the ceremony of drowning the sacred Apis in the waters of the Nile every 25 years. There is a considerable evidence that the famous statue of Serapis in the Serapeum at Alexandria was originally worshipped under another name at Sinope, from which it was brought to Alexandria. There is also a legend which tells the Serapis was a very early king of the Egyptians, to whom they owed the foundation of their philosophical and scientific power. After his death, this king was elevated to the estate of a god. Phylarchius declared that the word Serapis means the power that disposed the universe into the present beautiful order. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch gives the following account of the origin of the magnificent statue of Serapis, which stood in the Serapeum at Alexandria. While he was a pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy Soter had strange dream in which he beheaded a tremendous statue, which came to life and ordered the pharaoh to bring it to Alexandria with the possible speed. Ptolemy Soter, not knowing the whereabouts of the statue, was sorely perplexed as to how he could discover it. While the pharaoh was relating his dream, a great traveler by the name of Sospius coming forward and declared that he had seen such an image in Sinope. The pharaoh immediately dispatched Soletes and Dionysus to negotiate for the removal of the figure to Alexandria. 3 years elapsed before the image was finally obtained, the representatives of the pharaoh finally stealing it and concealing the theft by spreading a story that the statue had come to life and walking down the street leading from its temple, had boarded the ship and prepared for its transportation to Alexandria. I'm sorry, that's really freaking hysterical. Until its arrival in Egypt, the figure was brought into the presence of two Egyptian initiates, Immapolut, I totally am butchering that, Timothes and Manithio, the Sebonite, who immediately pronounced it to be Serapis. The priest then declared that it was equivalent to Pluto. This was a mastery stroke, for in Sepphoris, the Greeks and Egyptians found the deity in common, and thus religious unity was consummated between the two nations. Several figures of Serapis that stood in his various temples in Egypt and Rome had been described by early authors. Nearly all of these shown Grecian rather than Egyptian influence. In some, the body of the god was encircled by the coils of the great serpent. Others showed him as a composite of Osiris and Apis. A description of the god that is all probability is reasonable accurate is that which represents him as a tall, powerful figure, conveying the twofold impressions of manly strength and womanly grace. His face portrayed a deeply pensive mood, the expression inclining towards sadness. His hair was long and arranged in a somewhat feminine manner, resting in curls upon his breast and shoulders. The face, save for its heavy beard, was also decidedly feminine. The figure of Serapis was usually robed from head to foot in heavy draperies, believed by initiates to conceal the fact that his body was androgynous. Various substances were used in making the statues of Serapis. Some undoubtedly were carved from stone or marble by skilled craftsmen. Others may have been cast from the base or precious metals. One colonnus of Serapis was composed of plates of various metals, fitted together in a labyrinth sacred to Serapis. Stood a 13-foot statue of him, reputed to have been made from a single emerald. Modern writers discussing this image stated that it was made of green glass poured into a mold. According to the Egyptians, however, it withstood all the tests of an actual emerald. Clement of Alexandria describes the figure of Serapis compounded from the following elements. First, fillings of gold, silver, lead, and tin. Second, all manner of Egyptian stones, including sapphires, hematites, and emeralds and topazes, all these being grounded down and mixed together with the coloring matter left over from the funeral of Osiris and Apis. The result was a rare and curious figure, indigo in color. Some of the statues of Serapis must have been formed or extremely hard substances, for when a Christian soldier carrying out the edict of Theodosius struck the Alexandrian Cyprus with his axe, the instrument was shattered into fragments and sparks flew from it. It is also quite probable that Cyprus was worshipped in the form of a serpent, in common with many of the higher deities of the Egyptian and Greek pantheons. Cyprus was called the Theon Hetetragrammaton. Guys, I can't get that out. Or the god with the name of 7 letters. Heptagrammaton, there we go. The name Cyprus, like Abraxas and Mithras, contains 7 letters. In their hymns to Serapis, the priests chanted the 7 vowels. Occasionally, Serapis is depicted with the horns or a cornet of 7 rays. These evidently represented the 7 divine intelligences manifesting through the solar light. The Encyclopedia Britannica notes that the earliest authentic mention of Serapis in the connection with the death of Alexandria, such was the prestige of Serapis that he alone of the gods was consulted in behalf of the dying king. The Egyptian secret school of philosophy was divided into lesser and greater mysteries, the former being sacred to Isis and later to Cyprus and Osiris. Wilkinson is of the opinion that only the priests were permitted to enter great mysteries. Even the heir to the throne was not eligible until he had crowned Pharaoh, when by virtue of his kingly office, he automatically became a priest and the temporal head of the state religion. A limited number were admitted into the greater mysteries. These preserved their secrets inviolate. Much of the information concerning the rituals of the higher degrees of the Egyptian mysteries have been gleaned from the examination of the chambers and passageways in which the initiations were given. Under the temple of Cyprus, destroyed by Deities, were founded strange mechanical contrivances constructed by the priests in the subterranean crypts and caverns, where the nocturnal initiatory rites were celebrated. These machines indicated the severe tests of moral and physical courage undergone by the candidates. After passing through these torturous ways, the neophytes who survived the ordeals were ushered into the presence of Serapis, a noble and awe-inspiring figure illumined by unseen lights. Labyrinths were also a striking feature in connection with the rite of Serapis. And E.A. Wallace Bulge in The Gods of the Egyptians depicts Serapis minotaur-like, the body of a man and a head of a bull. Labyrinths were symbolically of the involvement of illusions of the lower world through which wanderers the soul of man in its search for truth. In the labyrinth dwells the lower animal man with the head of a bull who seeks to destroy the soul entangled in the maze of a worldly ignorance. In this relation, Serapis becomes the tire or adversary who tests the souls of those seeking union with the immortals. The maze was also doubtless used to represent the solar system, the bull man representing the sun dwelling in the mystic maze of its planets, moons, and asteroids. The Gnostic mysteries were acquainted with the arcane meaning of Serapis, and through the medium of Gnosticism, this god became inextricably associated with early Christianity. In fact, the Emperor Hadrian, while traveling in Egypt in AD 134, declared in a letter to Servanus that the worshippers of Serapis were Christians, and the bishop of the church was worshipped as at his shrine. He even declared that the patriarch himself, when in Egypt, was forced to adore Serapis as well as Christ. The little suspected importance of Serapis as a prototype of Christ can be appreciated after consideration of the following extract from C.W. King's Gnostics and Their Remains. There can be no doubt that the head of Serapis, marked as the face is by a grave and pensive majesty, supplied the first idea for the conventional portraits of the Savior. The Jewish prejudices of the first converts were so powerful that we may be sure no attempt was made to depict his countenance until some generations after all that had beheld it on the earth and had passed away. Serapis gradually usurped the positions previously occupied by the Egyptian and Greek gods and became the supreme deity of both religions. His power continued until the 4th century of the Christian era in AD 385. Theodosius, then would-be exterminator of the pagan philosophy, issued his memorable Edict de Ulduo Serapidis Durundio. When the Christian soldiers, in obedience to this order, entered the Serapeum at Alexandria to destroy the image of Sepphoris, which had stood there for centuries, so great was their veneration for the god that they had dared not touch the image lest the ground should open at their feet and engulf them. At length, overcoming their fear, they demolished the statue, sacked the building, and finally, as a fitting climax to their offense, burned the magnificent library, which was housed within the lofty apartments of the Serapeum. Several writers have recorded the remarkable fact that the Christian symbols were found in the ruined foundations of this pagan temple. Socrates, a church historian of the 5th century, declared that after the pious Christians had razed the Serapeum of Alexandria and scattered the demons who dwelt there under the guise of gods, beneath the foundation was found the monogram of Christ. 2 quotations will further establish the relationship existing, the mysteries of the Serapis and those of other ancient peoples. The first is Richard Payne Knight's symbolical language of ancient art and mythology. Hence, Varro says the column and terra, that is universal mind and productive body, were the great gods of the Samothracian mysteries, and the same as the Serapis and Isis and the later Egyptians, the Tautus and Arstre of the Phoenicians, and the Saturn and Ops of the Latins. The second quotation is from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. These, says Martinianus Capella in his hymn to the sun, dwellers on the Nile adore the Serapis, and Memphis worships as Osiris in the sacred rites of Persia. Thou art Mithras in Phrygia, Attis and Libya bows down to thee as Ammon, and Phoenician Babylos as Adonis. Thus, the whole world adores thee under the great names. My favorite topic of all time, the Odinic mysteries. The date of the founding of the Odinic mysteries is uncertain, some writers declaring that they were established in the 1st century before Christ, others the 1st century after Christ. Robert McCoy, 33 Degree, gives the following description of their origin. Quote, it appears from the Northern Chronicles that in the 1st century of the Christian era, Sigi, the chief of the Asir, an Asiatic tribe, immigrated from the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus into Northern Europe. He directed his course northwesterly from the Black Sea to Russia, over which, according to the tradition, he placed one of his sons as a ruler, as he is said to have done over the Saxons and the Franks. He then advanced through Cambria to Denmark, which acknowledged his 5th son, Skuld, as a sovereign, and passed over to Sweden, where Gif, who did homage to the wonderful stranger and was initiated into his mysteries, then ruled. He soon made himself master here, built Sigtuna as the capital of his empire, and promulgated a new code of laws and established the sacred mysteries. He himself assumed the name of Odin, founded the priesthood of the 12 Dotras druids, who conducted the secret worship and the administration of justice, and as prophets revealed the future. The secret rites of the mysteries celebrated the death of Balder, the beautiful and lovely, and represented the grief of gods and men as his death and his restoration to life. After his death, the historical Odin was apotheosized, his identity being merged into that of a mythological Odin god of wisdom, whose cult had promulgated. Odinism then supplanted the worship of Thor, the Thunderer, the supreme deity of the ancient Scandinavian pantheon. The mound where, according to the legend, King Odin was buried is still to be seen near the site of his great temple of Uppsala. The 12 Dudars, who preside over the Odinic mysteries, evidently personified the 12 holy and infallible names of Odin. The rituals of Odinic mysteries were very similar to those of the Greek, Persians, and Brahmins, after which they were patterned. The Dotras were symbolized the symbols of the zodiac, were the customs of the arts and sciences which they revealed to those who passed successfully the ordeals of initiation. Like many other pagan cults, the Odinic mysteries as an institution were destroyed by Christianity, but the underlying cause of their fall was the corruption of the priesthood. Mythology is nearly always the ritual and symbolism of mystery school. Briefly stated, the sacred drama from which forms the basis of the Odinic mysteries was as follows. The supreme invisible creator of all things was called All Father. His regent in nature was Odin, the one-eyed god. Like Quetzalcoatl, Odin was elevated to the dignity of the supreme deity. According to the Dotras, the universe was fashioned from the body of Ymir. the hoar frost giant. Ymir was formed from the clouds of mist and rose from Ginniganat, the great cleft in chaos into which the primordial frost giants and flame giants had hurled snow and fire. The three gods, Odin, Vili, and Ve, slew Ymir, and from him formed the world. From Ymir's various members, the different parts of nature were fashioned. Oh, do the myths have different stories to tell? After Odin had established order, he caused a wonderful palace called Asgard to be built on top of a mountain, and here the 12 Aesir gods dwelt together far above the limitations of mortal men. On this mountain also was Valhalla, the palace of the slain, where those who had heroically died fought and feasted day after day. Each night their wounds were healed, and the boar whose flesh they ate renewed itself as rapidly as it was consumed. Balder the Beautiful, the Scandinavian Christ, was beloved son of Odin. Balder was not warlike. His kindly and beautiful spirit brought peace and joy to the hearts of the gods, and they all loved him save one. As Jesus had a Judas among his 12 disciples, so one of the 12 gods was false. Loki, the personification of evil. Loki calls Hathor, the blind god of fate, to shoot Balder with the mistletoe arrow. With the death of Balder, light and joy vanished from the lives of the other deities. Heartbroken, the gods gathered to find a method to whereby they could resurrect the spirit of eternal life and youth. The result was the establishment of mysteries. The Odeanic mysteries were given in underground crypts or caves, the chambers 9 in number, representing the 9 worlds of the mysteries. The candidate seeking a mission was assigned to the task of raising Balder from the dead. Although he did not realize it, he himself played the part of Balder. He called himself a wanderer. The caverns through which he passed were symbolic of the worlds and spheres of nature. The priest who initiated him was emblematic of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The 3 supreme initiators, the sublime, the equal to the sublime, and the highest, were analogous to the worship master and the junior and senior wardens of the Masonic Lodge. After the wandering for hours through the intricate passageways, the candidate was ushered into the presence of a statue of Balder the Beautiful, the prototype of all initiates into the mysteries. This figure stood in the center of a great apartment roofed with shields. In the midst of the chamber stood a great plant with 7 blossoms, emblematic of the plants in this room, which symbolized the home of the Aesir or wisdom. The neophyte took his oath of secrecy and piety upon the naked blade of a sword. He drank the sanctified mead from a bowl made of a human skull, and having passed successfully through all the tortures and trials designed to divert him from the course of wisdom, he was finally permitted to unveil the mystery of Odin, the personification of wisdom. He was presented in the name of Balder and was with the sacred ring of order. He was held as a man reborn, and it was said of him that he died and had been raised again without passing through the gates of death. Richard Wagner's immortal composition, De Ring des Neblenden, is based upon the mystery rituals of the Odeanic cult. While the great composer took many liberties with the original story, the Ring operas, declared to be the grandest treachology of music dramas the world possesses, have caught and preserved in a remarkable manner the majesty and power of the original sagas. Beginning with the Das Ralgun, the action proceeds through Dalwaker and Siegfried to the awe-inspiring climax in Götterdämmerung Rung. Guys, I'm not going to say those words properly. The Twilight of the Gods. And I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, and got a little tip and taste of how they took different mythologies and gods and applied it to occulty things. I would go into it a little bit more, but I'm going to keep myself safe. Sending each and every one of you love and light. I hope you have a fantastic day. Wherever you are, be safe. Make sure you don't forget to hit that like button. And I'll see you on the next one, guys. Bye.